Hey, this is Philip from Caesar Motor Co, and on today's episode we're going to show you how to change the oil on the Classic Mini. Changing the oil on any car is important, but it's especially important on a Classic Mini. Because the A-Series engine shares the engine and the gearbox oil, all the contaminants from one also go into the other, so it's especially important that you change the oil regularly. Now let's take a look at what we're going to need to do this job. So we're going to need some vessel for draining the oil into, we're going to need some brake clean and shop towels, some way of removing the front grille, whether it's a screwdriver or an Allen key, 15/16 wrench or socket, pliers to take the oil filter off possibly, and of course oil. The Mini takes 4.8 liters of oil, so 5 liters of oil is what you need. Before you do the oil change, it's important to have the engine at operating temperature. This just makes the oil a bit thinner and it makes it easier to come out. So to begin, we're going to pop the hood. With the hood pumped, we can take the oil cap off. Once we got the oil cap off, now we can take off the front grille. We'll need to take the front grille off to be able to access the oil filter, which is located right here. On most cars, it's a series of Phillips head screws along the top. On this one, we've converted to some Allen head bolts that we've used some riv nuts on the back side. You may also have the quick release wing nut ones here. So whatever you need to do, you take the front grille off, and that's what we'll do now. With the front grille removed, we can now see the oil filter, which is located right here. It makes it much easier to access when we're removing it. But before we remove it, we have to drain the oil. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna put the jack on this side of the car, it's the front left side of the car, just lifting it up enough to be able to slide the oil pan underneath so we can drain the oil into it. The reason we're doing it from this side is because the oil drain is on this side of the oil sump, meaning that when we lift it up, we'll be able to get all the oil out. If we were to do it the other way around, there'd be a small portion of oil that would be left in the oil sump. So there we go, we have it lifted just enough in order for the drain pan we've got to fit underneath. Now you'll see right here on this side there is a 15/16 bolt. That is the drain bolt. So with either a wrench or in the case, if you have one of these sump cards, it's sometimes easier to get a socket on it, you want to remove that bolt. With it cracked just like that, we can then put the drain pan underneath and by hand slowly start to thread it out. You want to keep a little bit of pressure this way so that the oil doesn't pop right out. And then once you feel that you're at the end of the threads, which I am now, you can tell it's out, in one quick motion you can just pull out the plug and the oil will come out like that without getting your hand very oily. While the oil's draining, we can take this time to inspect the oil drain plug. Now on a Classic Mini, the oil drain plug is magnetic, and it's magnetic for a reason. The oil is shared between the gearbox and the engine, and because of this, there can be a lot of metal particulate that passes through. If this metal particulate is allowed to pass through the engine, it can ruin your bearings, it can ruin your oil pump, so it's really critical that this magnetic drain plug is used in order to keep all these pieces from going through the engine. There is an upgrade to these, and we like to always put them in every time we're doing a oil change, and that's with a high strength rare earth magnet drain plug. We actually make our own. The difference is the strength of the magnet. If you can imagine, particulates are floating through the oil. If you have a weaker magnet like this one that comes factory, it'll only pull pieces of metal that are kind of in close proximity. If you use a high strength magnet, it's going to pull way more particulate out of the engine and keep it from going through your bearings, through the oil pump, through your gearbox. To demonstrate just the difference, I'll show you if we clean this one off here. See, I've got this big metal plate, and the stock drain will not even lift an edge actually of this. You can tell it's magnetic, but if we compare this to our drain bolt here, not only will it lift the plate up, but it'll actually lift it clear off the ground. So it's way stronger, and you can imagine the amount of slag that this is going to capture versus the stock one. So it's something to think about when you're doing your oil change. So now all the oil is drained out, we can put the oil plug back in. It's always important to change the crush washer when you're changing the oil. Our oil drain bolt comes with a new crush washer, so we're just going to be using that. When you tighten up the drain bolt, you don't need to do it crazy tight, just enough to compress the crush washer. Once the drain bolt's tight, we can clean it up with some brake clean. Moving on to the oil filter, we're going to relocate our drain bucket just underneath so that when we open it up, it will go in here and be not all over the ground. These can sometimes be quite stiff, so it's usually kind of handy to have one of these oil filter wrenches. You just reach in here and loosen it up. And once it's loose enough by hand, you can just spin it off, making sure to keep it vertical just so that the oil doesn't pour everywhere. And then just holding it from the bottom, it'll come off like this. And it's easiest to pull it through the front here where you took the grill off. So just grab a piece of paper towel so we don't get this oily. And there we are. And now we can install our new filter. Before we put the new filter on the engine, we want to lubricate the rubber seal that's on top. And what we're going to do is we're just going to take a little bit of oil, new oil, and I'll put a little bit on the tip of the finger, and then just on the rubber seal on the top, spread a little bit around. This just helps lubricate it when you're installing it so that the rubber doesn't get all chewed up. And now once that's done, we can reinstall it. You want to spin this on by hand, and then when you're tightening it, you don't want to use a wrench. You just want to tighten it hand tight, a firm grip, but that's about good right there. You don't need to go crazy with it. And same as before, just with a little bit of brake clean, clean everything up. And now we can pull the oil drain bucket out and put the car back on the ground. With the car on a level surface, the oil drain plug tight, and the new filter installed, we can start putting oil in the car. It's a good idea to get a funnel, something like this, put on top of the valve cover, and then we can start putting oil in. Now the oil is pretty specific to a Mini. You need to use something that's a 20W50. Non-synthetic is recommended. And if you can find an oil that has a high zinc content, that's always a good idea. The Mini has a flat tappet camshaft, and with the shared oil between the engine and the gearbox, high zinc is highly recommended. Now the Mini takes 4.8 liters of oil, but I like to put in about 4 to 4.5 first, and then we're going to turn the car on, and from that point we'll adjust accordingly. So because the weight of the oil is quite thick, you want to pour this in pretty slowly. It's pretty easy to overfill the valve cover and have oil kind of drip out everywhere. So take your time, and like I said, put in about 4.5 liters of oil. In our case, we're using Valvoline VR1 racing oil. This fits the requirements that I was talking about earlier. It has high zinc content, it's non-synthetic, and it's in a 20W50 weight. Yeah, when I'm pouring the oil in like this, I'm just holding the funnel up slightly so that I can see inside the valve cover. You want to make sure that it's not going to overfill. It does fill up quite quickly because the passageways in the engine are quite small and the oil's pretty thick. So just lift it up like this, I can take a look inside, and as I'm pouring it in, I can make sure that it's not going to overfill. Another tip is if you pour the oil on the side like I'm holding it here, it doesn't glug. If you turn it this way, it tends to come out like that because air has to go in and out, but if you turn it sideways, you can get a smooth pour.
This is Oil Pour Corner with Philip Ogilvie. He shares the secrets of life as he pours the 20-Wick-50 into the A-Series.
Alright, so that's 4 liters of oil now. This is a good point to be able to start the car up, let it cycle through, and then we'll check the level. So before we turn the car on, make sure to put the oil cap back on. And now we can go into the car. Alright, so we're in the car right now and we're going to fire up the car and let it cycle a little bit for 30 seconds to a minute. Make sure it's in neutral. A good idea whenever you're starting a Mini is to not put the clutch in because of the 3 main bearings that the Mini engine has, as opposed to 5 like a normal 4-cylinder. When you put the clutch in when there's no oil circulating, it puts a side thrust on the thrust bearings, and this can cause some wear before the oil pump is activated. So it's always just a good Mini habit. Make sure engine's in neutral, foot off the clutch, fire it up. Now the reason we're letting it idle right now is because the oil needs to circulate through all the passageways in the engine, as well as fill up the oil filter. If we were initially just to check the level and go from there, we would have a false reading. So with the engine oil circulating right now, we've made sure that we've got good oil pressure. We can now turn it off and go check the list. With the car off, now we can check the oil level. What we want to do is take the dipstick, which is located right in the front of the engine here, pull it out and clean it off. And you'll see there's a minimum and a maximum line. Because we only have a little over 4 liters of oil right now, it should probably be at the minimum line. So what we're going to do with it clean is put it back in, all the way to the bottom, and pull it out again and take a look. As you see, we've got a little bit of oil here, so we still need to add a bit more oil, but that's good to know. So now we can take the oil cap back off, and we should probably need about another liter of oil, so we'll pour that in. So you can just keep checking the oil. We're almost there. We're halfway between the minimum and the maximum, so just a little bit more, we should be there. All right, and that's perfect. We're right below the maximum line there. That's where you want the oil to be. It's really important that you don't overfill the oil. If you overfill the oil, the crankshaft can actually hit the oil and aerate it, which makes it lose its lubricating properties. Also, by the crankshaft hitting the oil, it actually kills horsepower. So fill it up as per the dipstick, take your time and make sure it's right at the maximum level. With that done, we can put the dipstick back in, take our funnel out, and put the oil cap back on. And that's it, the oil's changed on the Mini. The factory recommends every 10,000 kilometers. We feel it's a little bit far. We usually do closer to 4,000 to 6,000. Every once in a while, go and check the oil, make sure it's at the maximum level, and then if it's really dark, that's probably a good time to change it. Hey, if you learned anything, hit that like button. It really helps out our channel, and thanks again for watching. Entirely for aesthetics. Oh my god.
I told you it was too big.